Get your filthy drug money out of my bank and do it now." The words, sharp and cold as shattered glass, sliced through the quiet hum of the Sterling Trust Bank lobby. Karen Miller, senior teller, a woman whose entire world was defined by the 4-foot-wide marble counter in front of her, swept her arm across its polished surface. A cascade of cash, a river of green and white, tumbled into the air. $950,000, bound in neat stacks, broke apart and scattered across the gleaming floor of the Atlanta branch. Elijah Vance stood motionless, watching the fruits of his labor rain down around his feet. This wasn't just money. This was 25 years of sweat and sacrifice. It was the physical manifestation of 15 high-end car washes, businesses he had built from nothing, now being trampled into the ground by a woman who saw the color of his skin and the simple gray hoodie he wore long before she ever saw the man standing before her. Have you ever been judged so completely, so viciously, that your very success was thrown back in your face as an accusation? If you have ever felt the sting of being dismissed before you even had a chance to speak, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because what you are about to witness is not a story of defeat, but a masterclass in strategic retaliation. Comment respect down below if you believe dignity is non-negotiable. Karen's stiletto heel, a weapon of petty authority, found a crisp $100 bill and ground it into the floor. She twisted her foot, a small, violent gesture, her eyes locked on Elijah's, boring into him with a smug certainty. "This," she announced, her voice dripping with venom for the entire lobby to hear, "is what I think of your dirty cash." Her colleague, a younger teller named Brenda, let out a nervous snicker, a pathetic echo of her superior's cruelty. The bank's security guard, a man named Frank, shifted his weight, his hand moving instinctively closer to the holstered weapon on his hip. Across the lobby, phones began to rise, small black mirrors reflecting a scene of profound injustice. Elijah's gaze never wavered from Karen's. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. Instead, he knelt. With a stillness that was more unnerving than any outburst, he began to gather the scattered bills. Each note was picked up, smoothed out, and placed carefully back into his leather briefcase. He moved with a quiet dignity that seemed to suck the very air out of the room, his calm a stark contrast to the ugly chaos Karen had created. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this woman had just made the single greatest mistake of her professional life. The digital clock on the wall read 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes until closing. Those numbers were no longer just telling time. They were a countdown to a reckoning. Elijah had walked into the bank 15 minutes earlier, his briefcase in one hand, a folder thick with financial documentation in the other. This was supposed to be a routine deposit, the culmination of a record-breaking month for his car wash empire. Instead, it had become a public crucifixion. "Sir, we don't handle that kind of money here," Karen had declared, her voice loud enough to be a public service announcement. It was the voice of someone who had never once had their own judgment called into question. Elijah had simply placed his Georgia driver's license and the folder on her counter. "It's legitimate revenue from my businesses," he stated, his voice even. "All the paperwork is right there." Karen had picked up his ID as if it were contaminated, holding it between two perfectly manicured nails. She held it at a distance, squinting as if trying to decipher a foreign script. "Right," she'd sneered. "The paperwork." Brenda from the next station had leaned over. "Another one trying to clean his cash?" she had whispered, her voice a stage whisper meant to be overheard. The two women shared a look, a silent, ugly agreement that cemented their shared prejudice. In a far corner of the bank, 20-year-old Chloe Jenkins, a journalism student at Georgia State, fumbled with her phone. She'd come in to deposit the meager paycheck from her campus coffee shop job, but she had stumbled into a story that would change the course of her life. She hit the Go Live button on her Instagram. Her stream flickered to life with an initial audience of 32 followers. "Y'all, you are not going to believe what is happening right now at Sterling Trust," Chloe whispered into her phone's microphone, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and outrage. "This teller, she just threw this man's money all over the floor. She called it drug money. I'm recording everything." As Elijah knelt, his wallet had fallen open on the floor. Chloe's camera zoomed in, catching a glimpse of an American Express Centurion card, the legendary Black Card, nestled amongst other premium credit cards. The logo on his car keys, resting on the edge of his pocket, was that of a Koenigsegg, a multi-million-dollar hypercar. But these were details lost on Karen, who was now puffing herself up with the false authority of bank policy. "Large cash deposits," she recited, as if reading from a sacred text, "are subject to manager approval under suspicion of money laundering activities." She drew out the words, savoring the power they gave her. The branch manager, David Chen, sat in his glass-walled office just 30 feet away. He had been engrossed in a game of online chess, a fact visible to anyone who cared to look. When Karen knocked sharply on his door, he hastily minimized the game window, adjusted his tie, and emerged with an air of profound annoyance. "What is it, Karen?" he asked, his eyes flicking past Elijah as if he were a piece of furniture. "This gentleman," she said, the pause before the word filled with enough contempt to curdle milk, "wants to deposit almost $1 million in small bills." David Chen still refused to make eye contact with Elijah. He addressed his teller as if she were a translator for an invisible man. "Did he provide proper identification?" "He has an ID," Karen sniffed, "but we all know how easy those are to fake." The clock ticked to 2:52 p.m., 8 minutes until closing. Chloe's viewer count had rocketed to over 300. The comments began to pour in, a torrent of digital fury. "This is pure racism. Call the news. Get this on Twitter now. OMG, they're treating him like a criminal for being successful." "This is so messed up," Chloe whispered to her growing audience. "They're judging him based on a hoodie. What century are we in?" Frank, the security guard, a man of 55 who had seen his fair share of trouble in his 15 years in bank security, moved to position himself directly behind Elijah. His hand rested on his radio, a silent threat. But something felt off. Every instinct honed over years of de-escalating conflicts told him this wasn't the aggressor. The man on the floor wasn't shouting, wasn't threatening. He was just collecting his money with a chilling, unbreakable composure. "Sir, we're going to need to see additional identification," Frank said, but his voice lacked the conviction of his posture. Elijah rose to his feet, the last of the bills now neatly stacked in his briefcase. He looked Frank in the eye. "What additional identification?" he asked, his voice still quiet but now laced with surgical precision. "Is required beyond a valid state-issued driver's license to deposit legally documented business revenue." David Chen stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "The Patriot Act gives us wide discretion for large cash transactions. We have stringent anti-money laundering protocols we must adhere to." "And which specific protocol is triggered by documented revenue from a chain of premium car washes?" Elijah countered. The specificity of the question seemed to throw the manager off balance. The clock hit 2:55 p.m., 5 minutes to closing. Karen's voice climbed an octave, becoming shrill. "Sir, I cannot and will not process funds from questionable sources. Bank policy clearly states—" "Bank policy states no such thing," Elijah interrupted. The quiet certainty in his voice was absolute. It was the voice of a man who didn't just follow policies, He wrote them. Chloe's livestream exploded. The viewer count passed 800. Her whispered commentary was a magnet for outrage. "This man is so calm, it's actually scary," she narrated. "If someone did that to me, to my hard-earned money, I'd be losing my mind. But he's like a chess player." The other customers in the lobby had stopped their own transactions. An elderly woman cashing her pension check clutched her handbag. A young couple trying to get a mortgage pre-approval were now watching, wide-eyed. They were all witnesses, an unwilling audience to a drama that felt far more significant than a simple bank dispute. David Chen glanced at the clock, desperate for the day to end. "Sir, we close in 5 minutes. I'm going to have to ask you to take your earnings and leave." Elijah snapped his briefcase shut. "I understand," he said smoothly. "I just need to make one quick phone call first." "You can make your calls outside," Karen snapped. "We're closing." "This will only take a moment," Elijah replied, his eyes locking with hers. 2:57 p.m. 3 minutes to closing. Elijah pulled out his phone. It wasn't a standard consumer model. It was a sleek, oversized device with a custom encrypted interface. The logo on the home screen was a stylized A over a globe. Chloe zoomed her camera in, but the details were just blurry enough to remain a mystery. David and Karen exchanged a look of shared exasperation. Frank stepped forward, his voice firmer now. "Sir, I have to insist that you exit the premises." Chloe's viewer count surged past 1,200. The comment section was a waterfall of text, moving too fast to read properly, but she caught snippets. Lawsuit, viral, discrimination, record everything. Elijah held up a single finger. 30 seconds. The bank fell into a profound silence, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the relentless ticking of the clock. 25 years of building a business from the ground up, providing jobs for over 200 people across the state. 15 car washes that served everyone from soccer moms to CEOs. $950,000 in legitimate, hard-earned revenue. All of it dismissed, spat upon, because of a gray hoodie and the color of his skin. But Elijah Vance had built more than just car washes. He had built an empire. And in a few moments, Sterling Trust Bank was about to learn exactly what and who they had just rejected. 2:58 p.m. 2 minutes to closing. Elijah pressed the call button. He put the phone on speaker, the volume just loud enough for those nearby to hear, but not so loud as to be obvious. Chloe edged closer. Her phone held steady. Her livestream viewer count was now 1,500. "Hi, Jessica. It's Elijah Vance." A crisp, professional woman's voice responded instantly from the phone. "Elijah, I wasn't expecting your call. Is everything all right?" "We need to accelerate the timeline on the Sterling Trust acquisition," Elijah said calmly. Karen's patronizing smile froze and began to crumble at the edges. David Chen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. The word acquisition hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. "The Sterling deal?" Jessica's voice was sharp. "I thought we were holding until the end of the quarter, pending the final board review." Elijah's eyes swept across the lobby, a silent accounting of the faces staring at him. His gaze landed on David Chen's now pale face. "Circumstances have changed," he said. "Execute the final purchase order, immediately." 2:59 p.m. 1 minute until closing. Jessica's voice, now laced with legal authority, came through the speaker. "Elijah, that's a major strategic shift. It bypasses the final cultural integration assessment. Are you absolutely certain?" "Completely," Elijah replied, his voice flat and cold as a surgeon's scalpel. "Serious cultural incompatibility issues have come to light." David Chen took an involuntary step forward, his voice cracking. "Sir, I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding here." Elijah held up his hand, silencing him without even a glance. Jessica, I'll call you back in 5 minutes with the final authorization codes. He ended the call. The silence that followed was deafening. Chloe's whispered commentary was a lifeline to her audience. Oh my God, y'all. Did you hear that? Acquisition? Is he buying something? This is getting insane. Frank Walsh, the security guard, shifted his weight again, this time out of profound discomfort. In 15 years, he'd seen robberies, arguments, and medical emergencies. He'd never seen a corporate takeover initiated from the lobby floor in response to bad customer service. 3:30 p.m. Closing time. A soft electronic chime echoed through the bank. Karen's computer screen automatically locked. The sound, normally a welcome signal of the end of the workday, now sounded like a funeral bell. Sir, the bank is now officially closed, David announced, his attempt at authority sounding hollow and pathetic. You must leave. Elijah didn't move. I require 2 more minutes of your time. You need to leave now, Frank repeated. But the words were rote, devoid of personal conviction. Chloe's stream was a phenomenon. The comments were a blur. Someone Google this guy. Elijah Vance. Elijah Vance Apex Holdings Group. Holy crap. He's the CEO. Her follower count hit 2,000. She was no longer just a student with a phone. She was a conduit for a story that was exploding across the internet. 3:01 p.m. Elijah reached into his briefcase again. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. He withdrew a thick, leather-bound portfolio and placed it squarely on the counter where his money had been desecrated just minutes before. Karen stared at it as if it were a bomb. David's face had drained of all color, leaving a sickly gray pallor. Elijah dialed his phone again. Jessica, it's me. Proceed with the immediate termination of the acquisition offer. Cite unresolvable operational and cultural incompatibilities as the primary reason. Understood, Jessica's voice replied. I will contact their board chair within the hour. Shall I mention the documented discriminatory practices in the formal termination notice? That phrase, documented discriminatory practices, landed like a physical blow. Karen's mouth fell open in a silent gasp. David grabbed the edge of the counter to steady himself. Chloe almost dropped her phone. Document everything, Elijah said calmly, and initiate a full legal review of their compliance protocols. All of them. He ended the call and looked directly at David Chen. Now, he said, his voice a low, dangerous hum, I believe we were discussing your bank's policies. 3:02 p.m. The world came crashing down on David Chen's head in the form of his vibrating cell phone. Then it buzzed again, and again. Then it began ringing, a frantic, insistent scream. The caller ID read, Regional Director, Patterson. I have to take this, David stammered, backing away towards his office. Take it here, Elijah's voice cut through his panic. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command from a man used to absolute obedience. I think we should all be a part of this conversation. Chloe's camera zoomed in on David's trembling hand as he answered the call, his finger fumbling to hit the speakerphone button. Hello, Mr. Patterson. An enraged voice roared from the phone's speaker. Chen, what in the goddamn hell is happening at your branch? My phone is melting down with alerts about a viral video. Something about discrimination and throwing a customer's money on the floor. David's eyes darted wildly between the face of Elijah Vance and his screaming phone. Sir, there's been a slight misunderstanding with a customer. A misunderstanding. David, the internet is saying we just lost the Apex Holdings acquisition deal. Fix it. Fix it right now before this burns the entire company to the ground. The line went dead. 3:43 p.m. Chloe's viewer count hit 2,800. The comments confirmed the impossible. It's him! Elijah Vance, CEO of Apex Holdings Group. Apex owns like half the financial infrastructure in the Southeast. This bank is so screwed, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Y'all, the comments are saying this man doesn't just own a bank, he owns the banks. Brenda, the other teller, had gone ghost white. She'd been furiously typing on her computer, and the search results had clearly terrified her. Karen, she hissed, her voice a strained whisper. Karen, you need to see this. But Karen was frozen, her eyes glued to Elijah, who had opened his portfolio and was now calmly reviewing documents. He wasn't a victim begging for service anymore. He was an investor evaluating a catastrophic loss. 3:04 p.m. Frank's radio crackled to life. Dispatch to Unit 4. What's your 1020 at Sterling Trust? We're getting reports of a disturbance. Frank looked at Elijah, a man who had just terminated $1 billion deal from the lobby floor. He looked at David, a man who seemed to be having a stroke. He looked at the crowd of customers, now all filming with their phones. How could he possibly describe this situation? Dispatch, the situation is under control, he finally said, the words feeling like a lie. No threat, but stand by. Elijah closed the portfolio. He stood to his full height, his presence seeming to fill the entire cavernous room. He smiled, but it was not a smile of warmth or forgiveness. It was the smile of a predator that had just successfully cornered its prey. Actually, Frank, Elijah said, his voice resonating with newfound power across the marble floor. I don't think this situation is under control at all. I think it's just getting started. Chloe's phone showed 3,500 viewers and was climbing by the second. She forgot to whisper. Her voice came out loud and clear. Y'all, I think we're about to find out exactly who this man is. 3:05 p.m. Elijah reached into his briefcase and produced a business card. He didn't pull it from a simple holder. It came from a dedicated, monogrammed slot. He placed it gently on the counter, directly on the spot where Karen's heel had ground his money into the floor. The card was thick, made of a heavy, textured stock, the lettering embossed in platinum foil that caught the harsh fluorescent lights. Chloe's camera zoomed in, shakily. Her stream, now with 4,000 viewers, became the world's window into this moment. She read the words aloud, her voice cracking with the sheer magnitude of the revelation. Elijah Vance, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Apex Holdings Group. A silence fell over the lobby, so complete it felt like a physical pressure. It was the sound of dozens of human brains simultaneously failing to process reality. Karen stared at the card as if it were an artifact from another planet. David Chen made a small, choking sound. Frank, the security guard's hand dropped from his radio as if it had been burned. Oh, my God, Chloe breathed into her phone. Y'all, this man doesn't just own banks, he builds empires. 3:06 p.m. Elijah retrieved the encrypted tablet he had used earlier. The screen lit up, not with a simple phone interface, but with a complex corporate dashboard displaying real-time financial data. At the top of the screen, in bold letters, it read, Apex Holdings Group, Q3 Acquisition Portfolio. The screen showed a list of financial institutions, asset values, revenue streams, risk assessments. And there, near the bottom, highlighted in a damning shade of red, was a single-line item, Sterling Trust Bank. Acquisition status, terminated. Value, $1.2 billion. David Chen saw it first. His legs seemed to give out from under him. That's us, he whimpered. That's our valuation. Karen's voice was a ghost of a whisper. You were buying us? Elijah angled the tablet so Chloe's camera could get a perfect, clear shot of the screen. The 4,000 people watching now had irrefutable proof. Was buying you, Elijah corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. Past tense. 3:07 p.m. David's phone began to scream again, a cacophony of calls from the board chairman, the regional director, the chief compliance officer. He ignored them all, his eyes locked on Elijah. "Mr. Vance," he stammered, his career flashing before his eyes. "There has been a horrific, terrible misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, David," Elijah replied, using the manager's first name with chilling familiarity. "Your employee publicly accused me of being a criminal. She defaced my company's legal tender. You, her superior, supported and enabled her actions. This entire interaction has been documented by—" Elijah glanced briefly at Chloe's phone. "Now over 4,500 live witnesses. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a stress test, and your institution failed spectacularly." The comments on Chloe's stream were a blur of fire and vindication. A $1 billion mistake. "Karen is about to be the most famous fired person in America. This is legendary. He stress-tested them." 3:08 p.m. Karen finally found her voice, though it was frayed with panic. "Sir, Mr. Vance, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were." "That is the entire point," Elijah shot back, his voice finally taking on a hard, dangerous edge. "You didn't know, and you didn't care. You saw a black man in a hoodie, and your mind filled in the rest with a narrative of criminality. That single prejudiced assumption didn't just cost you your job. It cost your colleagues their bonuses, your shareholders millions, and your bank its future. That assumption just cost this company a $1.2 billion deal." The number, spoken aloud, seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Karen's face crumpled. David looked like he was going to be physically ill. Elijah wasn't finished. "But more importantly," he continued, his voice dropping to a conversational level that was somehow more terrifying, "it revealed a deep, systemic rot within your corporate culture. It reveals an institutional bias that makes this entire organization fundamentally incompatible with the values and operational standards of Apex Holdings Group." 3:09 p.m. Chloe's stream hit 5,000 viewers. Her phone's battery was flashing a critical 15% warning, but she would have held it until it died in her hands. She was no longer just a witness. She was the primary chronicler of a seismic event. Frank's radio crackled again. "Dispatch to Unit 4. We have a supervisor en route. ETA 2 minutes. What is the situation?" Frank looked at the scene before him. A titan of industry, dressed in street clothes, holding a $1 billion bank hostage with nothing but a tablet and the truth. A teller and a manager whose careers were actively disintegrating before his eyes. Thousands of people watching live. There was no protocol for this. "Dispatch, the situation is resolved," he said into the radio. "I repeat, the situation is resolved. No supervisor needed." Elijah overheard him. "Actually, Frank, you might want to tell your supervisor to come anyway. This conversation is far from over." The authority in Elijah's voice was now absolute. It wasn't the authority of a customer demanding service. It was the authority of a king passing judgment in his court. 3:10 p.m. David Chen's phone rang again, and this time he answered, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold it. "Gerald, this is Patricia Downing, chairwoman of the board." A woman's voice, tight with panic, crackled through the speaker. "I am looking at a live video with 5,000 viewers that appears to show our staff discriminating against a customer. Tell me this isn't what it looks like." David looked at Elijah, at the tablet, at Chloe's phone. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. "Patricia, we've had an incident with a customer who turns out to be the CEO of the company that was set to acquire you." Elijah finished the sentence for him, his voice calm and clear. "Was? That deal is terminated, effective immediately." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, Patricia's voice, now stripped of all anger and filled with sheer, unadulterated dread. "Mr. Vance? Is that you on the line?" "It is." "Sir," she began, her voice trembling, "on behalf of the entire board of Sterling Trust, I want to offer my most sincere and profound apologies for any—" "The apology," Elijah cut her off, "needs to come from your staff. But before that, we need to have a serious discussion. A discussion about your institution's training, your policies, your hiring practices, and the corporate culture you have allowed to fester within these walls." 3:11 p.m. Chloe's viewer count surged past 5,500. Her battery was at 10%. She felt a surge of panic, not for herself, but for the story. She couldn't let it die. Sarah, her face a mask of despair, slumped against her teller station. The brutal math was sinking in. A single moment of prejudice, a lifetime of unexamined bias, had vaporized over $1 billion and would likely cost hundreds of people their jobs. David made one last, desperate attempt. "Mr. Vance, surely we can find a way to work through this. It was a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake." Elijah closed his tablet and returned it to his briefcase with a soft, final click. "David, it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Your employee made a choice. You made a choice. And now I'm making a choice." He picked his business card up off the counter and held it up for Chloe's camera to see one last time. "However," he said, his tone shifting slightly, "my primary interest is not in burning this bank to the ground. My interest is in rebuilding it from the foundation up. I am interested in systemic, permanent change. And that conversation, Patricia, David, Karen, starts right now." Chloe whispered to her audience, a sense of awe in her voice. "Y'all, I don't think this story is over. I think it's just beginning." 3:12 p.m. Elijah opened his briefcase again. The methodical precision of his movements suggested he was no longer a customer, but an auditor beginning a hostile takeover of a failed institution. He pulled out a thick document, the very same due diligence portfolio his team had prepared for the acquisition of Sterling Trust Bank. "Sterling Trust Bank, incorporated in Atlanta, Georgia, May 12, 1982, he began, his voice calm and measured as he read from the executive summary. "Annual gross revenue, $62 million. Net profit margin, a rather anemic 4.7%. Current regional market share of deposits, a paltry 1.8%. Total employee count, 192. He placed the document on the counter, each page a testament to months of research that Karen's prejudice had rendered worthless in mere seconds. The irony was suffocating. Chloe's live stream was now a viral sensation, with over 6,000 viewers. Her battery warning was a screaming red 8%. She frantically dimmed her screen, praying it would last. History was being written, and her phone was the pen. "My company, Apex Holdings Group," Elijah continued, his gaze sweeping over the terrified bank staff, "has an acquisitions budget for this fiscal year of $5 billion. Your entire institution, David, represents less than 5% of our available capital. We acquire banks of your size not as landmark deals, but as routine quarterly strategic adjustments." 3:13 p.m. The barrage of calls to David's phone was relentless. He had stopped looking at the caller ID, knowing it was a revolving door of board members, regulators, and now, undoubtedly, news reporters who had caught wind of the viral broadcast. The power dynamic had inverted so completely that he, the manager, felt like an intruder in his own bank. "Mr. Vance," he pleaded, sweat now visibly beading on his brow, "please, tell us what we can do. There must be a way to salvage this. We will do anything you ask." Elijah produced a second set of documents from his briefcase, these marked with the official seal of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. U.S. Banking Code, Title 12, Chapter 16, he recited from memory, his tone clinical. Financial institutions found to have engaged in documented discriminatory practices, particularly those that violate the Community Reinvestment Act, are subject to immediate and severe regulatory penalties. This includes the potential forfeiture of their FDIC insurance status. The legal jargon hit David like a physical blow. Losing FDIC insurance was a death sentence for any bank. You're saying, you could have us shut down. I'm saying your actions today, broadcast live to over 6,000 witnesses, have created a catastrophic liability exposure, Elijah clarified. This exposure makes any continued acquisition attempt fiscally irresponsible and legally untenable for any reputable financial group. But more importantly, it triggers a mandatory FDIC review. Karen, who had been shrinking against the wall, found a sliver of her voice. It was just a misunderstanding. The deposit was suspicious. What, specifically, was suspicious? Elijah's question was sharp, precise, the question of a prosecutor cornering a hostile witness. Walk me through your thought process, Karen. From the moment I entered this building, what did you see that triggered your suspicion? 3:14 p.m. Under the weight of 6,000 pairs of digital eyes, Karen's composure finally shattered. You were the hoodie, and the sheer amount of cash. In small bills, it just seemed... And my race, Elijah finished for her, his voice flat. Did my being a black man factor into your assessment, Karen? The question hung in the air, thick and heavy. The lobby was so quiet you could hear the frantic tapping of thumbs in Chloe's live stream comments. Make her answer. She can't even say it. This is the most incredible and painful thing I have ever watched. Elijah continued with devastating, methodical precision. Violations of the Fair Housing Act and Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which this incident clearly falls under, carry civil penalties that can reach into the millions. Your bank's last quarterly filing listed cash reserves of approximately $3 million. A full-scale federal investigation, coupled with the inevitable class action lawsuits that will arise from this broadcast, would render this institution insolvent in less than 90 days. 3:15 p.m. From his briefcase, Elijah produced a third item, a ruggedized military-grade tablet. It was different from his business device. The screen showed a secure government portal. This device has a direct, authenticated connection to the FDIC's Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, he explained, angling the screen so Chloe's camera, now at a terrifying 5% battery, could capture the official seal. A single authenticated submission from this device triggers an immediate, top-down, comprehensive audit of every transaction, every loan application, every hiring decision, and every customer complaint your bank has had for the past 36 months. Before I make that submission, would you like to guess what your institution's current compliance score is? David's voice was barely a whisper. We've had to cut back on some of the newer sensitivity training protocols, budget constraints from the post-pandemic recovery. Budget constraints, Elijah repeated, nodding slowly. His expression wasn't angry. It was something far worse. Disappointed. An interesting choice of priorities. You have the budget for imported Italian marble, for designer lobby furniture, for this prime real estate location, but not for the basic training required to ensure your staff treats every member of this diverse community with dignity and respect. Frank, the security guard, finally spoke, his voice raspy with emotion. Mr. Vance, I've worked here 15 years. I've never seen a situation like this. What you've seen today, Frank, Elijah corrected gently, is the system working exactly as it was designed to. Karen's reaction wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom of a disease of prejudice, reinforced by negligent training and a complete lack of meaningful oversight. 3:17 p.m. Elijah opened the due diligence portfolio to a page marked with a bright red tab. Let's talk about infrastructure, shall we? Your bank's primary credit facilities, Your international wire transfer capabilities, and your entire electronic payment processing network are all managed by a company called Southeast Financial Systems. Are you familiar with them, David? David nodded numbly, a look of dawning horror spreading across his face. Southeast Financial Systems, Elijah stated, delivering the final, crushing blow, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Apex Holdings Group. We own your credit lines. We process your wires. We manage the software that runs your ATMs. We provide the backbone for every single credit card transaction you facilitate. Your ability to operate as a bank tomorrow morning is entirely dependent on my company's continued cooperation. The reality of that statement settled on the room like a physical weight. They weren't just a potential acquisition target. They were a vassal state that hadn't even known the name of their king. Chloe, her voice trembling, whispered to her 7,000 viewers, "Y'all, this man doesn't just own banks. He owns the system that allows banks to exist." Her battery hit 3%. 3:19 p.m. Karen, her face streaked with tears, finally summoned the courage to ask the question that mattered. What do you want from us? What will make this right?" Elijah looked at her, his gaze direct and unflinching, but without malice. "I want you to understand, Karen. I want you to understand that your prejudice today didn't just insult one man. It revealed a sickness that poisons every interaction for every customer who doesn't look like you, who doesn't fit your narrow, preconceived notion of what success is supposed to look like." He gestured toward Chloe, whose phone was now held up by sheer willpower. "That young woman started recording because she recognized injustice. 7,000 people are watching because your actions offended their fundamental sense of right and wrong." 3:20 p.m. Elijah closed the portfolio, but left the damning documents spread on the counter like evidence at a crime scene. "Here is what is going to happen next," he announced. "I am giving this institution exactly one chance, not to save our deal, that ship has sailed, but to save itself. One chance to prove that it is capable of genuine, measurable, systemic change." David leaned forward, his hands clasped as if in prayer. "Anything. We will do anything." Patricia's voice, a ghost from the phone, echoed his desperation. "Mr. Vance, we formally agree to any and all conditions you set forth." Elijah smiled for the second time. This smile was different. It held no menace. It held a sliver of possibility. "Excellent," he said, "because I have a list of non-negotiable requirements, and they will permanently transform every aspect of how this institution operates." He pulled a final, professionally bound document from his briefcase. It was a comprehensive reform protocol. This wasn't revenge. This was a revolution. "Karen Miller," he said, addressing her directly. "You are suspended, effective immediately. Your colleague Brenda is also suspended. Both of you are pending a full, independent investigation into your customer interaction histories. David Chen," he continued, "you are being placed on administrative probation. A new Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, appointed by my team at Apex, will be installed at the regional level and will have final authority on all branch management decisions." He opened the protocol. Chloe, her battery now at a critical 1%, angled her phone to capture it. First, mandatory, in-person, immersive bias and sensitivity training for every single employee, from the janitorial staff to the board of directors. This will be conducted by the best external consultants in the country, at your expense. Second, the immediate implementation of our proprietary bias detection software across your entire network. This AI analyzes transaction times, loan approval rates, and customer feedback, flagging any statistical disparities between demographic groups for immediate review. Third, he flipped a page. Body cameras will be worn by all customer-facing employees. All footage from transactions over $10,000 will be subject to random third-party audits. Fourth, This bank will create and fund a $2 million small business incubator program, specifically targeting minority and women-led startups in the Atlanta area. And fifth, he said, looking directly at Karen, I'm not interested in simply ending your career. I'm interested in your education. You will participate in a 90-day intensive program at the National Civil Rights Museum. Upon completion, you will spend the next year speaking at financial institutions across the country about unconscious bias and the catastrophic consequences it can have. He was giving her a chance not just to be better, but to do good. It was a move of such strategic grace that it stunned everyone into silence. 3:29 p.m. Elijah closed the protocol. These requirements are not suggestions. They are the conditions for your bank's continued existence. My compliance team will be here at 9 a.m. tomorrow to begin implementation. He pulled out the original deposit slip for his $950,000. I will return in 1 month to make this deposit. How my transaction is handled then will determine whether this bank has a future. He turned to leave, then paused, looking at Chloe. Thank you, he said to her. Your decision to bear witness made all of this possible. One person can be dismissed as an anomaly. 7,000 witnesses create a movement. His final words were for David, but they were meant for the world watching through Chloe's dying phone. The next person who walks through that door in a hoodie, treat them with the same respect you would show a king, not because they might be one, but because they are human. And with that, he walked out. The live stream finally died, the screen going black, but not before Chloe's final, awe-struck whisper reached over 8,000 people. He didn't just win an argument, he changed the entire game. 30 days later, Chloe Jenkins stood outside the same Sterling Trust Bank, her new phone broadcasting live to over 50,000 followers. She was no longer just a student. She was a recognized voice in citizen journalism, with 3 internship offers from major news networks. Okay, family, she said into the camera. It's been exactly 1 month. We're going back in. Let's see if anything has really changed. The moment she walked in, the difference was palpable. Multilingual welcome signs adorned the walls. The staff behind the counter was a vibrant reflection of Atlanta's diversity, and mounted on the wall was a large screen displaying real-time customer satisfaction scores broken down by demographic. All were above 4.9 out of 5 stars. At 2:30 p.m., the glass doors opened again. Elijah Vance walked in, wearing the exact same gray hoodie. He approached the counter where a new senior teller, a bright young black woman named Maria, greeted him with a warm, professional smile. Good afternoon, sir. How can we help you today? He placed his briefcase on the counter. I'd like to make a business deposit. The transaction was smooth, respectful, and efficient. It took 7 minutes. David Chen, looking humbled and 10 years older, personally oversaw the final paperwork. As Elijah was finishing, Karen Mitchell approached. She wasn't wearing a bank uniform, but a simple professional dress. She looked him in the eye, her own gaze clear and steady. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice filled with a humility that had been unimaginable a month ago. I just gave my first speech yesterday. I told them my story. I told them how my ignorance almost destroyed so many lives. And I told them how your grace gave me a chance to build something better. Thank you. Elijah simply nodded. Change is hard, Karen, but it's always possible. He then turned to Chloe's camera, knowing she was there, knowing the world was watching. Well, what you witnessed here a month ago was an act of discrimination, he said, his voice resonating with authority and purpose. But what you are witnessing today is the result. Today, my company, Apex Holdings, is officially launching the Dignity in Banking initiative, We are seeding a $10 million fund to provide bias training grants to financial institutions nationwide. We will use mystery shoppers to audit banks for fair treatment, publishing all results publicly. We will not just punish bad behavior, we will celebrate and reward excellence in equality." He looked directly into the lens, his eyes seeming to pierce through the screen to every person watching. If you have ever faced discrimination, do not let your anger be your only response. Let it be your fuel. Document everything. Gather your evidence. Think strategically. And then, don't just demand change. Build it. Create a system where the injustice you faced can never happen to anyone else. Chloe turned the camera to herself, her eyes shining. "You heard the man," she said to her massive audience. "If this story inspired you, share it. Let the world know that one person's dignity, backed by preparation and courage, can change the world. Hit that subscribe button and comment below with your own story. Because every voice matters. Your story could be the one that starts the next revolution." The final shot was of Elijah Vance, shaking hands with Maria, the new teller, in the gleaming marble lobby, a space that had been transformed from a crime scene of prejudice into a beacon of progress. One man's quiet dignity had become a legacy of systemic change.